Ladies and gentlemen, we're honored today to have a guest speaker in our house with us that has had a distinguished career in the service of his country. He is an Oregon Air National Guardsman, a friend of the Paul H. Langford EPME Center as he was involved heavily in the satellite NCOA Academy program in his home state of Oregon. He's also been a member of the Enlisted Field Advisory Council and represented many of our enlisted men and women in the Air National Guard at the national level before assuming a position at 1st Air Force as the Command Chief Master Sergeant of Air Forces North. Recently selected and now in the position for 8 days, our Command Chief Master Sergeant of the Air National Guard, Chief Master Sergeant James Hotelling.
Thank you. All right. 8 days. Wow, that's pretty crazy, huh? And it's true, 8 days. So before I start my prepared remarks, I want to make a deal with everybody, okay? Last night I had dinner with about 20 of your instructors, and as we're eating dinner, I start hearing them chatter a little bit, and they're talking about a bet that they're making amongst themselves. This bet, where are all the instructors at? There's a bet going on. The bet is, how long am I going to speak today? And I guess they got a pot going on about how long it's going to be, because I'm the new guy, and they have no idea what my style is. And so as I'm listening, apparently, you know, the average time is between 25 minutes and 35 minutes of time. Look at that. Yeah, look at those heads shake. No. Well, I'm here to blow that pot, too. How about 10 minutes? Fair enough? All right. See, I'm popular now. I'm popular now. All right. See, it's the honeymoon stage. Wait till all the policies come out and you want to stab me all the time. So, all right, 10 minutes. That's what I'm going to give you. But here's a part of the deal, because I stayed here last night too, and I listened and I watched the parking lot back and forth. Everybody packing their cars last night. Who did that last night? Did a bunch of you do that last night? And I would venture to guess that the cars are probably running right now too. So I owe you that. I know where we're at with that. But 10 minutes. Give me 10 minutes. Let me deliver the speech that I want to give to you. Pay attention to it. I think it's important. I actually wrote it. They tell me writers now too. But I wrote this speech because I thought it was important. This is the message that I think you should go for to be successful in your careers. Okay? All right, let's get the show on the road. It's a prepared speech, though. All right, Colonel Cartwright, Chief, Colonel Lawson, Chief Warrant Officer, say it for me. Say it real loud. La voix. I practiced all last night. TEC staff, distinguished guests, and most importantly, NCOA and ALS 13-3 and 13-2, good morning and congratulations. Thanks for the opportunity to be here today and allowing me to personally congratulate you on achieving a significant milestone in your military careers. Your instructors have spent these past weeks providing you with the tools and knowledge necessary to lead as supervisors and non-commissioned officers in our Expeditionary Air Force. You've been asked to demonstrate your knowledge amongst your peers, and you have been tested through academic rigors for this course. Today you'll receive formal recognition of your efforts by walking across this stage, clasping the diploma, which signifies your personal achievement and that is of class. As you depart this beautiful campus, I want you to walk away with a greater sense of who you are as a member of this profession of arms. Knowing who you are requires three key things. You need to understand the past, you need to recognize your place in the present, and you need to have clear vision for where you're going in the future. Take a moment to consider our past and to recognize that you are a member of a sacred profession of arms and a warrior spirit that dates back before Sparta. Your resolve to defend the homeland is no less today than when it was when 300 Spartan warriors stood against thousands of Persians at Thermopylae. As supervisors and NCOs, you represent the first line of leadership, mentoring, and training for today's modern military warriors. You are members of a proud heritage who have gone before you and laid the foundation upon which our enlisted legacy has been built. Warriors like you have existed since the beginning of battle. The smallest tactical units in the Roman legion was commanded by a centurion. That was basically a master sergeant. In the 14th century, military organizations from Italy to France recognized the importance of the NCO, and they called him sergeant. The attributes of the enlisted force are simple. The force is of good character, it's loyal, It exhibits attention to detail, demonstrates command presence and readiness, along with exhibiting your professional skills. These attributes are as important today on the battlefields of Afghanistan as they were at Valley Forge and when we created our Air Force in 1947. The enlisted heroes of the past have inspired the heroes of today. It's important to remember the past and to value the lessons of those who have gone before us, but we must never forget the importance of the present. We must always seek to be mindful of where we are at any given moment. It is our mindfulness of our current place and time, our present-day responsibilities, that epitomize the modern enlisted professional, you. When we dwell on the past or focus too intently on the future, we miss the opportunity to demonstrate excellence in our current assignments and to be the very best at what we do today. Let me encourage you to seek to be the very best at your job, at what you do today. Gain every ounce of technical and practical experience possible. Volunteer for the toughest assignments because it's the flames of adversity that forges the strongest steel. You need to value change. Value change because recognize it as a force that we must be ready to change vectors, and only those with an adaptable mindset and willingness to flex with an organization will be able to contribute to its future success. The challenges of change signifies limitless opportunities of success for those willing to use training and knowledge gained through this PME to listen, to communicate, and to lead. The present airman is one who is resilient, and resiliency is established on the 4 pillars of fitness: physical, mental, social, and spiritual. As supervisors and NCOs, we are not only responsible to ensure our own fitness, but those of who we lead. It is our present actions that contribute to the legacy of our past, but let us never allow our legacy to become greater than our vision for the future. You not only must be students of the past who demonstrate this excellence, but you must have that clear vision. Sitting here today, your senior airmen, your staff sergeants, and your technical sergeants. But soon, you're going to be the chiefs of tomorrow. And each of you must begin preparing now to fill the roles of leadership that you'll hold in the future. The path of the NCO is not easy. It's filled with obstacles and challenges, but don't lose heart. For every challenge overcome is a valued lesson learned. It's an experience savored and a victory earned. Team, our walk as enlisted leaders is not without ambushes and firefights. This is the moment of truth for you, the proving of your stripes and the solidifying of your leadership capabilities. Look to your left and right. Recognize you're supported by your fellow airmen who have your back, and guess what? They're expecting you to have theirs too. On your professional journey, you will at times stumble. Realize that no battle is won without sweat, blood, and tears. The difference between the victim and the victor is that when the victor is knocked down, he gets back up. Be that victor, always get back up. As you walk your journey, always continue to develop yourselves. This PME is but one milestone in a long and steady race. The path of success is paved by deliberate development of yourself. Volunteer for deployments, seize every chance to lead, and ask for ways to improve your work sections and your units. Development is the cornerstone of our warrior ethos. It is a lifelong pursuit, and I challenge you to make it a part of your daily lives. In closing, I want to express my deepest gratitude to each one of you. See, you are less than the 1% of the nation. You have stood up and said, "Send me." Your service is not without cost, and yet each day you perform your jobs with excellence. I am very proud of all of you. Cherish today. Cherish this moment as you celebrate your successes. It was well earned. Take your knowledge and apply it, and most importantly, pass it along to your airmen by being the daily example of what our enlisted corps should be all about. Team, the firefights continue every day, both home and abroad, but we're not alone. I'm proud to be serving alongside of you as a member of our profession of arms. We are truly one joint and coalition team, one total force. Thank you very much. 10 minutes. Got it. Yep, thank you.
Thank you, Chief Hotelin. Would the class leader, Technical Sergeant Lisa Powell, and Staff Sergeant Nicholas Bloomer please come forward for the presentation of the class speaker gift?
It's under 10. Under 10.
Chief Hotelling, we would like to take this opportunity to thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to attend our graduation and be our guest speaker. So with heartfelt thanks, deep appreciation, we would like to present this little token of our appreciation from Class NCOA Class 13-3 and ALS Class 13-2.
Thank you very much.
At the Paul H. Langford EPME Center, we strive to create an academic environment that promotes professionalism and personal growth. We make every effort to further develop in our students their professional skills, knowledge, and attitude required of leaders, supervisors, and managers in today's rapidly changing Air Force.
In pursuit of this goal, we challenge these students to comprehend and apply, to proactively participate rather than passively absorb, and to proudly lead rather than meekly follow. We insist on high academic standards, dedication, healthy competition, and the highest standards of personal conduct.
It is for these reasons that we believe the most significant achievement any one student can attain is a diploma. Colonel Cathcart, Chief Felch, and Chief Master Sergeant Hotelin, would you please come forward for the graduation of NCOA Class 13-3 and ALS Class 13-2.
This is a once-in-a-lifetime experience for these graduates, so please feel free to come forward and take photos of the graduation ceremony. It is also tradition at the Paul H. Langford Center that we clap one time as each student is called on stage. If you have a chant or a shout-out, please feel free to do so. And now for the moment the students have patiently waited for, graduation.
The instructor for A Flight is Master Sergeant Glenn Weaver.
From the 232nd Operations Squadron, Nellis Air Force Base, and A Flight leader, Technical Sergeant David Rogers. From the 509th Maintenance Group, Whiteman Air Force Base, Technical Sergeant Benjamin Adams. From the 437th Supply Chain Ops Squadron, Scott Air Force Base, Technical Sergeant Rachel Atchley. From the 108th Support Flight, Joint Base McGuire Dick Lakehurst, Technical Sergeant Jennifer Bowen. From the 185th Maintenance Group, Sioux City Air National Guard, Iowa, Technical Sergeant Colin Engel. Cannot be with us today from the 88th Diagnostic Therapeutic Squadron, Wright Pat Air Force Base, Ohio, Technical Sergeant James Honor. From the 4th Aerospace Medicine Squadron, Seymour Johnson Air Force Base, Technical Sergeant Marshall Jacobs. From the 20th Aircraft Maintenance Squadron, Shaw Air Force Base, Technical Sergeant Thomas Kennedy. From the 9th 10th Security Forces Squadron, Yars, Vienna, Ohio, Technical Sergeant John Lucas. From Group Air Station North Bend, United States Coast Guard, Petty Officer First Class Kenneth McFarland. From the 108th Force Support Squadron, Joint Base McGuire-Dix Lakehurst, Technical Sergeant Angela Miller. From the 125th Special Tactics Squadron, Portland, Oregon, Technical Sergeant Stephen Studeni. From U.S. CENTAF, Shaw Air Force Base, Technical Sergeant Roderick Tumblin. From the 375th Communications Squadron, Scott Air Force Base, Technical Sergeant William Updike. And from the 108th Airlift Squadron, St. Joseph, Missouri, Technical Sergeant David Velasquez. Ladies and gentlemen, A-Flight.
The instructor for B Flight is Technical Sergeant Beth Pernozzo.
The flight leader for B Flight is from the 4th Civil Engineering Squadron, Seymour Johnson Air Force Base, Technical Sergeant Eddie Redondo. From the 509th Operations Support Squadron, Whiteman Air Force Base, Technical Sergeant Angela Britton. From the 101st Security Force Squadron, Bangor, Technical Sergeant Brent Brockway. From the 254th Security Force Squadron, Anderson Air Force Base, Technical Sergeant Francine Cruz. From the 186th Logistics Readiness Squadron, Meridian, Mississippi, Technical Sergeant Damon Eichelberger. From the 14th Weather Squadron, Asheville, North Carolina, Technical Sergeant Ronald Fink. From the 509th Communications Squadron, Whiteman Air Force Base, Technical Sergeant Emmanuel Garcia. From the 20th Civil Engineer Squadron, Shaw Air Force Base, Technical Sergeant Adam Gardner. From the 20th Maintenance Squadron, Shaw Air Force Base, Technical Sergeant Terrence Jenkins. From the 185th Maintenance Squadron, Sioux City, Iowa, Technical Sergeant Jason Camrad. From 128th Air Control Squadron, Camp Douglas, Technical Sergeant Matthew King. From the 20th Component Maintenance Squadron, Shaw Air Force Base, Technical Sergeant Joseph Manska. From the Aerospace Data Facility of Colorado, Buckley Air Force Base, Technical Sergeant Harry McClure. From the Regional Threats Analysis, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Technical Sergeant David Pawinski. And from the 618th Air and Space Operations Center, Scott Air Force Base, Technical Sergeant Sandra Stiles. Ladies and gentlemen, B Flight.
The instructor for C Flight is Technical Sergeant Timothy Capps.
The class leader for NCOA Class 13-3 from the 101st Logistics Readiness Squadron, Bangor, Maine, Technical Sergeant Lisa Powell. Flight leader for C Flight from the 173rd Maintenance Squadron, Klamath Falls, Air National Guard, Oregon, Technical Sergeant Kevin Olson. From the 509th Aircraft Maintenance Squadron, Whiteman Air Force Base, Missouri, Technical Sergeant Hugo Astudillo. From the 437th Aeroport Squadron, Charleston Air Force Base, South Carolina, Technical Sergeant Robert Charest, Jr. From the 771st Enterprise Sourcing Squadron, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Ohio, Technical Sergeant Dustin Dallas. From the 4th Generation Cell, Robbins Air Force Base, Georgia, Technical Sergeant Monique Dixon. From the National Air and Space Intelligence Center, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Ohio, Technical Sergeant Derek Dufresne. From the 20th Logistics Readiness Squadron, Shaw Air Force Base, South Carolina, Technical Sergeant Roger Fowler. From the 4th Component Maintenance Squadron, Seymour Johnson Air Force Base, North Carolina, Technical Sergeant Jonathan Frederick. From the 172nd Maintenance Ops Flight, Jackson, Mississippi, Technical Sergeant Eugene Halcomb. From the 437th Air Maintenance Squadron, Joint Base Charleston, Technical Sergeant Jonathan Livingston. From the 618th Air and Space Operations, Scott Air Force Base, Illinois, Technical Sergeant Jennifer Moose. From the 114th Security Forces Squadron, Joe Foss Field, South Dakota, Technical Sergeant Derek Biggins Roth. From the 284th Air Support Operations Squadron, Smoky Hill Range, Kansas, Air National Guard, Technical Sergeant Justin Stevens. And from the 1st Combat Camera Squadron, Charleston Air Force Base, South Carolina, Technical Sergeant John White, Jr. Ladies and gentlemen, Sea Flight.
The instructor for D Flight is Master Sergeant Will Brett.
The flight leader from the 211th Engineering Installation Squadron from Pennsylvania Air National Guard, Technical Sergeant Charlene Sprouse. From the 618th Air and Space Operations Center, Scott Air Force Base, Illinois, Technical Sergeant Burton Connor. From Detachment 6, 372nd Training Squadron, Whiteman Air Force Base, Missouri, Technical Sergeant Bob Dice. From the 911th Air Refueling Squadron, Seymour Johnson Air Force Base, North Carolina, Technical Sergeant Enrico Darden. From Det 4 AMC Air Operations Squadron, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Ohio, Technical Sergeant Stephanie Duck. From the 4th Communications Squadron, Seymour Johnson Air Force Base, North Carolina, Technical Sergeant Jeremy Harper. From the 345th Recruiting Squadron, Scott Air Force Base, Illinois, Technical Sergeant John King. From the 122nd Mission Support Group, Indiana Air National Guard, Technical Sergeant Travis Craik. From 135th Aircraft Maintenance Squadron, Maryland Air National Guard, Technical Sergeant James Markley. From the 145th Maintenance Squadron, North Carolina Air National Guard, Technical Sergeant Gary McNeil. From the 265th Combat Communications Squadron, Maine Air National Guard, Technical Sergeant Kenneth Nelson. From the 173rd Logistics Readiness Squadron, Oregon Air National Guard, Technical Sergeant Matthew Rhodes. From the 609th Air Communications Squadron, Shaw Air Force Base, South Carolina, Technical Sergeant Thomas Snyder. From the 285th Civil Engineering Squadron, St. Croix, Virgin Islands, Technical Sergeant Danny Sumnick. From the 138th Security Forces Squadron, Oklahoma Air National Guard, Technical Sergeant Justin Talbert. From the 164th Security Forces Squadron, Tennessee Air National Guard, Technical Sergeant Monsherique Williams. Ladies and gentlemen, D-Flight.
The instructor for E Flight is Technical Sergeant Jason Goodman.
The flight leader for E-Flight from Coast Guard Base, Miami Beach, Petty Officer First Class George Morales. From the 88th Communications Squadron, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Ohio, Technical Sergeant Shakiru Balogan. From the 110th Security Forces Squadron, Battle Creek Air National Guard Base, Technical Sergeant Mark Kane. From the 315th Air Medical Evacuation Squadron, Joint Base Charleston, South Carolina, Technical Sergeant Latanya Coleman. From 274th Air Support Operations Squadron, Hancock Field, New York, Technical Sergeant Jason Hancock. From the Air Force Petroleum Agency, Fort Belvoir, Virginia, Technical Sergeant Kathleen Janes. From Detachment 115 Air Force ROTC, Northeast Region, Storrs, Connecticut, Technical Sergeant Stephen Light. From the Air Mobility Command, Scott Air Force Base, Illinois, Technical Sergeant Young McBride. From Air Force Central Command, Shaw Air Force Base, South Carolina, Technical Sergeant Marvin McGee. From the 4th Aircraft Maintenance Squadron, Seymour Johnson Air Force Base, North Carolina, Technical Sergeant Jeremy Nadeau. From Headquarters Air Force Television, Pentagon, Technical Sergeant Michael Slater. From the 332nd Recruiting Squadron, Nashville, Tennessee, Technical Sergeant Brian Sweetman. From 166th Air Refueling Squadron, Rickenbacker Air National Guard Base, Technical Sergeant Jason Vincent. From the 509th Civil Engineering Squadron, Whiteman Air Force Base, Missouri, Technical Sergeant Brian Verdon. From the 126th Weather Flight, Camp Douglas, Wisconsin, Technical Sergeant Thomas Williamson. Ladies and gentlemen, E-Flight.
The instructor for F Flight is Technical Sergeant Jeremy Hunt.
Our flight leader from the 108th Logistics Readiness Squadron, McGuire Air Force Base, Technical Sergeant Quasandra Ward. From the 88th Security Forces Squadron, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Technical Sergeant Justin Ames. From the 628th Aerospace Medicine Squadron, Joint Base Charleston, Technical Sergeant Lacey Brokaw. From the 145th Aircraft Maintenance Squadron, North Carolina Air National Guard, Technical Sergeant Joe Burris. From the 4th Component Maintenance Squadron, Seymour Johnson Air Force Base, Technical Sergeant Eddie Colon. From the 222nd Air Support Operations Squadron, Atlantic City, New Jersey, Technical Sergeant Patrick Donahoe. From the 192nd Fighter Wing, Langley Air Force Base, Virginia, Technical Sergeant Jessica Fontaine. From the Department of Intelligence Agency, Boiling Air Force Base, Technical Sergeant Romero Forty Castro. From the Headquarters Air Mobility Command, Scott Air Force Base, Technical Sergeant Charles Johnson. From the 509th Aircraft Maintenance Squadron, Reitman Air Force Base, Technical Sergeant Chauncey Johnson. From the 165th Civil Engineer Squadron, Garden City, Georgia, Technical Sergeant Antonio Lane. From the 88th Security Forces Squadron, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Technical Sergeant Jesse Matos. From the 347th United States Air Force Recruiting Squadron, Chicago, Illinois, Technical Sergeant Michael Music. From the 20th Component Maintenance Squadron, Shaw Air Force Base, Technical Sergeant Jason Pearson. From the 121st Civil Engineer Squadron, Rickenbacker, Air National Guard Base, Technical Sergeant Mark Roush. Ladies and gentlemen, F-Flight.
The instructor for G Flight is Master Sergeant Augusto Gonzalez.
Our flight leader from the 908 Security Forces Squadron, Maxwell Air Force Base, Alabama, Technical Sergeant Michael Connor. From the 165th Airlift Squadron, Louisville, Kentucky, Technical Sergeant Eric Anderson. From the 163rd Aircraft Maintenance Squadron, Marsh Air Reserve Base, California, Technical Sergeant Jason Avera. From Detachment 1, 20 Operations Group, Eastover, South Carolina, Technical Sergeant Shane Broom. From Air Force Center Network Integration, Scott Air Force Base, Illinois, Technical Sergeant Thomas Deal. From the 88th Security Forces Squadron, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Ohio, Technical Sergeant George Fries. From the 15th Operational Weather Squadron, Scott Air Force Base, Illinois, Technical Sergeant Scott Hose. From the 190th Logistic Readiness Squadron, Topeka, Kansas, Technical Sergeant Kimberly Jones. From the 180th Operations Support Squadron, Swanton, Ohio, Technical Sergeant Kyle Kennard. From the 337th U.S. Air Force Recruiting Squadron, Shaw Air Force Base, South Carolina, Technical Sergeant Lawrence Mills. From the 509th Maintenance Operations Squadron, Whiteman Air Force Base, Missouri, Technical Sergeant Anthony Morrison. From the 4th Aircraft Maintenance Squadron, Seymour Johnson Air Force Base, North Carolina, Technical Sergeant Christopher Murdoch. From the 16th Airlift Squadron, Charleston Air Force Base, South Carolina, Technical Sergeant Claudia Onido. From the 145th Logistic Readiness Squadron, Charlotte, North Carolina, Technical Sergeant Cherise Pearson. And from the 148th Fighter Wing, Duluth, Minnesota, Technical Sergeant Brent Ronchetti. Ladies and gentlemen, G Flight.
The instructor for H Flight is Technical Sergeant Drew Carson.
The flight leader from H Flight, from the 101st ACOM, Tyndall Air Force Base, Technical Sergeant Jeffrey Nines. From Headquarters, Air Mobility Command, Scott Air Force Base, Illinois, Technical Sergeant David Banning. From the 254th Force Support Squadron, Anderson Air Force Base, Guam, Technical Sergeant Melissa Barger. From the Air Force Life Cycle Management Flight, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Ohio, Technical Sergeant Cameron Carroza. From the 185th Operations Support Flight, Sioux City Air National Guard, Iowa, Technical Sergeant Adam Dinslagi. From the 28th Air Operations Weather Squadron, Shaw Air Force Base, South Carolina, Technical Sergeant Angelique Drown. From the Air Force Element Space Command, Chantilly, Virginia, Pentagon, Active Duty, Technical Sergeant Justin Golston. From 480th Intelligence, Surveillance, and Reconnaissance Group, Fort Gordon, Georgia, Technical Sergeant Justin Kraft. From the 4th Aircraft Maintenance Squadron, Shady J, Seymour Johnson Air Force Base, North Carolina, Technical Sergeant Kyle Nichols. From the 114th Security Forces Squadron, Sioux Falls Air National Guard, South Dakota, Technical Sergeant Stephen Peterson. From the 128th Force Support Squadron, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, Technical Sergeant Jeffrey Perona. From Headquarters, Air Mobility Command, Scott Air Force Base, Technical Sergeant John Ruiz, not able to graduate with us today. From the 509th AMXS, dropping warheads on foreheads, Whiteman Air Force Base, Missouri, Technical Sergeant Damon Smith. From the 203rd Red Horse Squadron, Virginia Beach, Virginia, Technical Sergeant Cynthia Waller. From the 132nd Maintenance Squadron, Des Moines, Iowa, Technical Sergeant Justin Webeck. Ladies and gentlemen, H-Flight.
The instructor for I-Flight is Technical Sergeant Paul Evans.
The flight leader for I-Flight from the 120th Force Support Squadron, Great Falls, Montana, Technical Sergeant Joel Enriquez. From the 179th Maintenance Squadron, Mansfield, Ohio, Technical Sergeant Jeffrey Burgett. From the 20th Operations Support Squadron, Shaw Air Force Base, South Carolina, Technical Sergeant Jason Connor. From the 579th Medical Support Squadron, Washington, D.C., Technical Sergeant Jessica Dunn. From the 337th Air Force Recruiting Squadron, Shaw Air Force Base, South Carolina, Technical Sergeant Clifford Jackson. Unable to be with us today from the 315th Logistics Readiness Squadron, Charleston Air Force Base, South Carolina, Technical Sergeant Stephanie Kimbrell. From the Air Force Petroleum Agency, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Ohio, Technical Sergeant Jason King. From the 130th Security Forces Squadron, 130th Airlift Wing, West Virginia, Technical Sergeant Christopher Kohut. From Detachment 3, 373rd Training Squadron, Charleston Air Force Base, South Carolina, Technical Sergeant Matthew Marsh. From the 148th Civil Engineer Squadron, Duluth, Minnesota, Technical Sergeant Christopher Orman. From the 375th Communications Support Squadron, Scott Air Force Base, Illinois, Technical Sergeant Waylon Ross. From the 435th Supply Chain Operations Squadron, Scott Air Force Base, Illinois, Technical Sergeant Jeremy Speth. From the 509th Maintenance Squadron, Whiteman Air Force Base, Missouri, Technical Sergeant Justin Thompson. From the 307th Force Support Squadron, Barksdale Air Force Base, Technical Sergeant D'Angela White. From the 280th Combat Communications Squadron, Dothan, Alabama, Technical Sergeant Bryant Williams. Ladies and gentlemen, the I-Flight.
The instructor for J-Flight is Technical Sergeant Tony Hoover.
The flight leader for J-Flight from the 129th Logistics Readiness Squadron, Moffett Federal Airfield, California, Technical Sergeant Johnny Duran. From the Office of Security and Intelligence, National Reconnaissance Office, Technical Sergeant Kari Armstrong. From the Air Mobility Command, Air Operations Squadron, Scott Air Force Base, Illinois, Technical Sergeant Tiffany Begwa. From the 73rd Silver Support Team, Topeka, Kansas Air National Guard, Technical Sergeant Nicholas Clare. From the 20th Maintenance Squadron, Shaw Air Force Base, South Carolina, Technical Sergeant Robert Corsi. From the 130th Security Forces Squadron, from the 130 Airlift Wing, Charleston, West Virginia, Technical Sergeant Ronald Dean. From the Information Exploitation Squadron, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, Ohio, Technical Sergeant Michael Keller. From the U.S. Air Force Central Command, Shaw Air Force Base, South Carolina, Technical Sergeant Tony Lewis. From the 4th Civil Engineering Squadron, Seymour Johnson Air Force Base, North Carolina, Technical Sergeant Ahmad Powell. From the 509th Security Forces Squadron, Whiteman Air Force Base, Missouri, Technical Sergeant Jeremy Sanford. From the 437th Maintenance Squadron, Charleston Air Force Base, South Carolina, Technical Sergeant Joseph Sparling. From the 4th Force Support Squadron, Seymour Johnson Air Force Base, North Carolina, Technical Sergeant Sandy Townsend. From the 123rd Air Control Squadron, Blue Ash Air National Guard, Ohio, Technical Sergeant Daniel Tucker. From the 375th Security Forces Squadron, Scott Air Force Base, Illinois, Technical Sergeant Joshua Webster. Ladies and gentlemen, J